Hello and welcome to Cupcake Addiction's Smurf House Giant Cupcake tutorial, where I'll be showing you how to make this really great little Smurfs house using your giant cupcake mold. For those of you that follow my channel, you'll know that I'm a big fan of using the giant cupcake mold for a whole range of things that aren't necessarily just giant cupcakes, and this great Smurf house is just one of them. Tools and equipment that we will be using today. I'm cheating just a little bit on the Smurf figurines. We could spend hours and hours making these out of fondant, but there's a good chance they still wouldn't look as Smurfy as we would like them to. So I've got 4 little Smurfy figurines, including, of course, little chef, to go on our finished cake. And today we're just concentrating on making the actual Smurf house. I've got a pre-iced cake board. I will leave sizing and dimensions of that in the description box below. I've just covered that in a green fondant over here, and I've got it positioned on a cake decorating turntable. We also have a great tutorial for how to ice a cake board, so I will leave a link to that in the description box below. This is purely optional, but this is just a little, it's actually a giraffe print embossing mat, but I'm going to use it for a bit of a cobblestone effect on a couple of our little pieces in the house today, but purely optional and just for a little bit of extra detailing. I've got some of our perfectly pipeable buttercream frosting, and I've tinted that Smurf blue today. I will leave a link to our recipe for that frosting in the description box below. I've got our pre-baked giant cupcakes. So I've used giant cupcake basics, I think 1 and 2. I will leave a link in the description box below for those. And that basically shows you how to get your cupcake baked, extracted, and ready to carve and stack and decorate. I've got a little bit of cornflour. You can also use icing sugar in a shaker. I've got a pizza cutter. I've got a serrated edge knife or a bread knife. I've got it's a little a cake spatula, an offset spatula, but you can also use a regular knife. Quite a sharp paring knife, a butter knife. I've got a fondant roller or a regular rolling pin will do. I've got a paintbrush, a square cutter. I've got 4 different colours fondant. So I've got white, I've got red, it's the main colours for our Smurf house. And then for the detailing, I've got some chocolate brown, and I've just mixed a tiny bit of that with some white to give us more of a caramelly brown. I've got some water, I've got some melted white chocolate, and just a few toothpicks. So let's get started. There's going to be quite a lot to this tutorial. It's a little bit bigger than just our regular cupcakes. Now the first thing that we want to do is we want to carve up this giant cupcake. Normally when I do a giant cupcake tutorial, I come to you already carved and ready to go, but this one's a little bit different. The bottom half of mine is a red velvet mud cake and the top half is a chocolate cake. What we're going to do first, we want to cut that away because we really want the bottom of our Smurf house to not have that, I guess, that gradient that the giant cupcake has. So we want it to almost be more straight up and down. All right, so the next thing we want to do is just cut off, I always cut off the top and bottom because you will always have sort of brown or darker edges on the tops and bottoms of your cupcake. So just trim away any crispy or dark edges. All right, now we want to give that a bit of a flat, I guess a flat resting spot or a flat base. So I'm just going to cut it off. It doesn't have to be perfectly flat because we're actually going to fold that fondant underneath a little bit. We don't mind if it's got a little bit of a, I guess a little bit of a lip underneath there that it's sort of sitting on. But I do want to just take my knife and I want to make it as circular as possible. So I'm just going to cut around, cut away any of those, I guess, sharp edges and just make it as circular as possible. All right, so I'm happy with that. It doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. It is the bottom of a mushroom after all, but we do want it to be just not a cupcake shape. We're really turning this into a bit more of a cake. We're just using the giant cupcake mold. But we'll pop that over there, all carved and ready to frost. Now taking the top of your giant cupcake, I'm gonna trim off the bottom here. We might actually also just slightly take the ridges away from that giant cupcake. Now the other thing that you want to do here is just take off this top. So just trim over so that it's not so pointed at the top and it's a little bit more rounded. All right, so I've tidied up my mess a little bit. Now we're just going to separate out 2 parts again. Actually our 3 parts. I'm going to take that offset spatula and this nice blue frosting, and I thought the blue with the red velvet would be a really nice contrast. Not too much in here because I know I'm going to cover it with fondant. And then I'm just going to do a really quick and I guess just a really quick good crumb coat around the outsides, around the edges. I'm not going to worry too much about the bottom or the underside, just around the edges, and that's just going to give the fondant something to stick to and make it all nice and neat, keep all those crumbs in place. So not too much frosting here, just nice and light as you go around. So you'll notice as I crumb coat that, I'm actually going back and forward with the spatula, almost working the frosting into the cake rather than just smearing it on. Back and forward, and working it into, picking up any crumbs and working it into the sides of that cake. Pop a little bit on top. So just make sure that you're working on a relatively clear space here. And I'm just going to pop down a little bit of cornflour. Pick up that white fondant. A quick knead just to soften it up, make it nice and pliable and nice and workable. Because I know I sort of want a longish shape, I'm going to roll it into a bit of a fat sausage first, stick it on the bench and push it down. It's quite humid here today, so my fondant is quite sticky, so I'm just going to put a little bit more cornflour on top of it and a little bit more underneath. Swipe it around to give it a really nice coating on the back, and we're just going to roll it out. All right, so I've rolled out my nice piece of fondant. Take that pizza cutter and you just want to cut across a nice straight line all the way across the bottom. And then we're going to take this rolling pin and I'm just going to roll the fondant over it. Make sure that the bottom of your rolling pin is along that nice flat edge at the bottom of your fondant. I've got a couple of just little sticky bits here as I come across, so I'm just going to put a little bit of cornflour on. If you feel any sticky bits at all on the back of your fondant, a little bit more cornflour, and that'll just stop it from sticking as we go to unravel it. Pick that piece up, and now I'm just going to sit it on the table, attach that piece of fondant, and I'm just going to turn my rolling pin around. Beautiful. All right, so once you've got it on like that, it's looking rather messy. So just take your hands and just come around and just smooth it down, making sure that you're pushing out any air bubbles as you go. All right, so at the top here, you can just fold this fondant in. Starting to regret my choice of blue frosting here. With the back, take that sharp knife, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to overlap the two longish type parts, and I'm going to create a little seam at the back here. Just tucking that one over, pushing that all at the top. Now I'm going to take my sharp knife and I'm just going to cut off any of this excess sagginess. All right, now just doing a final smooth off. Now as you're smoothing it off, just tuck in underneath. So just pushing the edges in there underneath, trapping all of that frosting. And then take your pizza cutter and just trim around the bottom. If you want to shift your cake around at any stage, just take that long knife, slide it underneath, and you can pick the whole thing up and move it around. All right, so we've tidied up a little bit. I've popped our little mushroom base off to the side. So now you want to take your red fondant, and always do the white fondant first because it is quite easy to stain white fondant, especially after working with red fondant. So where possible, use your white and your light colours before you use your bright and dark colours. Once again, just a little knead, roll it into a ball, and this is going to get rolled out into a big circle. If you love this tutorial, make sure that you head on over to our channel, My Cupcake Addiction, and hit the subscribe button. We've got a ton of great tutorials on cupcakes, cake pops, cake decorating, and a few other things thrown in, rainbow jelly jars and other bits and pieces. So I'm sure that you'll find something that you like there. All right, so I've got my piece of red all rolled out. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to pick it up and just slide it slightly off to the side. I'm going to take that blue frosting again and my spatula, and I'm just going to put just a nice light coating of blue on the top. Put it as neat as possible. Perfect. All right, now you want to take this piece of red fondant and just lay it over the top. So I find just picking it up in your palm and centering it over the top and letting it fall down. So I'm just going to just pull this down, smoothing out any little air pockets or ridges as I go down. All right, from here, I'm just going to take my pizza cutter and I'm going to cut just a little way outside the edge. So all the way around. Now you want to take your long knife, just slide it underneath, and I'm just grabbing that cake in the very, very middle, and I'm just going to tuck that fondant under. Just tucking it under to neaten off our top of our mushroom. And once we attach that to the bottom of the cake, it will all hold itself together. So bringing back in the bottom of the cake now, make sure that you always know where the seam of your cake is. Now take a little bit of that water, and not too much here, you just want to dampen the top of that fondant. Water with fondant acts like a bit of a glue, but too much of it will actually eat into the fondant and it becomes your worst enemy. So water can be your best friend or your worst enemy. Now lift up your mushroom lid, making sure to keep those bottom edges tucked under nicely. Just sit it on top. From here, I like to just sort of pinch out the edges a little bit, just to make sure that I've got a nice little overhang around the top of my mushroom. And then just take your hand, run it over the top and smooth it all down. So we can attach that now to our cake board, and then we're going to do a little bit of a tidy up because I'm running out of space, and come back and get to the finer details. So to attach that to the board, once again, just a little bit of water, not too much. You can also use a bit of ganache or a bit of chocolate here. Just a little spot of water, and use your knife, slide underneath, and I'm going to support with a clean hand at the front there, lifting and positioning. I'm going to slide my knife carefully out behind here. So I'm just going to support with one hand and just slide that knife out. Beautiful. All right, let's have a little tidy up and we'll come back and decorate our Smurf house. All right, so we're starting to shape our little Smurf house. Time for a little bit more of that white fondant, and we're just going to make the big kind of spots or splodges that go on top of the house here. So a little bit more cornflour down, and we're going to roll out our last piece of white. All right, so I've rolled that out, and as you can see, it is really quite nice and thin. So I'm going to take my pizza cutter again. You can just use a knife, but I love the pizza cutters. And I'm just going to make like kind of just a big blobby type shape. No exact shape here, they're all going to be different. Now I'm going to just apply a little bit of water on the back here. I like this first one to be quite kind of large and long. That's going to be our main spot on the front, and I'm just going to lay that over the front. Now as I lay that, I can already see it's just a touch long, so I'm just going to take my knife and I'm just going to cut off just around here. At the back here, as I mentioned, if you've got any little jagged edges, just smooth them off with your finger. Now you just want to cut just another couple of little circles or little sort of spotty type shapes. You can use a circle cutter for this. It's a nice little mushroomy type shape. You can see there I'm just neatening off the edges and stick that on. A little bit of water and on the other side. Now I'm pretty happy with that. You can have as many or as few little spots as you like. You can see there our little Smurf house is really starting to come along. So we can get rid of that white fondant, and it's time to start doing some of those little details. With the little details, I'm going to do firstly the front door and some little windows. All right, so rolling out that chocolate brown, and I'm going to take my pizza cutter again. I'm going to cut straight up and straight up on this side. It's probably a little bit thick for a door, so we might just go a little thinner. Lovely. Now you just want to come across the top so you've got a nice arch in your door. And I'll cut it a bit long, and we'll just stick it up and see roughly how big we want that door to be. That is about spot on. I'm pretty happy with that. So you want to add a little bit of texture to your door, you can if you like. I'm just going to give it kind of like a bit of a wood grain look. I'm going to use the back of a knife. Just go up it. Then I'm going to use the front very, very lightly in between. So the front and the back actually give you slightly different textures and slightly different sizes. When you use the front, never go too hard or too deep because you don't want to cut through it. We're just giving it a very, very fine amount of texture there. So there you've got your front door with a little bit of texture. Turn it over, a little bit of water on the back. Lovely, and we're going to stick that. So turn the cake around to face you and pop on your front door. Now when it comes to details like the front door that do come all the way down to the bottom of the cake, so that they're in nice and tight with the cake, you can either take your pizza wheel or just a knife and just push the very edges under a little bit. Now it's time to make a couple of windows. All right, so for your windows, that's where our little square comes in. So I'm going to make 2 windows. For each window, you're going to want 2 squares. 1, 2. So you want to take those squares and you want to cut 2 of them in half. They're going to make our little window shutters. And we're going to give those the same sort of a texture as we gave the front door. So just a little bit of the back of the knife and a little bit of the front. All right, so for your little windows, we're just going to cut out using your really sharp knife. You're just going to cut out an inner square, or you can alternatively use a smaller square cutter. All right, there's your 2 little windows. Now you can either use these pieces here, otherwise you can just cut some nice little strips out of your centerpieces. 2 for each window. Lovely. Now I like to position the windows on first. So turning the cake a little bit and taking a little bit of that water, just a tiny, tiny little bit of water. I'm just going to put a little bit on each corner because I don't want there to be too much. Maybe a little bit along my top rung as well. And just position it off to the side of the house. And then you can take your little inner pieces, a little bit of water. So you'll need to stick 1 piece in whole with the window, and the other piece you'll cut in half, and you'll also cut just a little nick out of it. So cut it in half and cut a little chunk out of it just to allow for that extra room for the one that we've just added. So you've got your little window taking shape there, and then we're just going to add the little window shutter. So if you like with your little window shutters, you can attach them a nice little bit of water down the side and attach them to the side of that window just on one half, and you can leave the other sort of side flapping open a little bit. Nice and welcoming on your little Smurf house. We'll repeat that again on the other side. All right, so there's our little door and windows. Now we might roll out a little bit more, some of our caramelly type colour. Now with the caramel, I'm going to make a little cobblestone path, and I'm also going to make some nice little stones that go up and around the top. So I'm just going to roll that out, not as thin as I've rolled those other pieces, and then I'm going to take my impression mat, and I'm just going to roll my impression mat right over the top. You can either roll the fondant onto the impression mat or the impression mat onto the fondant. It really does not matter. And then we'll peel that away. And you should have a bit of a cobblestone effect. You'd never know that was from a giraffe. You might, looking at it, but we'll say you'd never know that was from a giraffe. So we're just going to cut down about the same width as our door. A nice little path. Perfect. All right, so I'm just going to cut in just a little bit of a rounded indent there so that we can push it flush up against the house. Tiny bit of water on the back. And then you want to push it up against that door. And then we're going to use the knife and just cut off that excess. Now I'm also just going to round that off with my finger just to blend it in with the edges of our board a little bit there. Taking that excess, you just want to roll a few little kind of just different shaped and misshapen balls. You don't want them to be perfectly round. You want them to sort of look a little bit like this. They're supposed to look like kind of little stones or little rocks. So you're going to roll a bunch of those in all different sizes and stick them around the outside of that door. A little bit of water on the back of each one. You can also use caramels for this. All right, so you've got your little door all lined there. And as you can see, she's really, really starting to look like a Smurf house now. Now, I'm going to take some of this brown fondant. I'm going to make a chimney. So just roll a bit of a ball and then roll it into a sausage. You could also use a Tootsie roll for this if you wanted to. And I'm going to stick that onto the back of my little house using some melted chocolate, but we'll let that sit there for a few minutes just to set. And I'm going to roll about 6 or 8 just little pieces, sort of little sausages, and these are going to just be little joiners that kind of join the roof to the bottom of the house just to give it some detail. So we're going to stick those at little random intervals, 4 or 5, 5 or 6. We'll just see how many we need. So a little bit of water there and there, and you want to attach it to the house and then attach it to the roof. So not too much water, we don't want them falling off. All right, so we've ended up with 5 in total going right around the outside of our little house there. And we're just going to roll a few more rocks in the darker brown to go down the outside of that garden path. Then we can add our chimney and get smurfing. All right, so we've got our melted chocolate, and I'm going to use the chocolate to attach our little chimney just because it's going to be a little bit sturdier than using water. So just a bit of chocolate on the back there, and I'm going to stick the chimney. And I'm actually going to push that down into the fondant and just support it for a second until that chocolate becomes a little bit tacky. Lovely, and then it's time to apply our Smurfs. So for our Smurfs, I'm just going to put a little bit of white chocolate on the bottom of their feet, and that's just going to stick them in place, but they're still going to be really easy for the kids to get off the board. So we'll take Papa Smurf. We might have him standing right out the front. Beautiful. Now we'll take, I think this is Grumpy. Oh yeah, he looks grumpy. Take Grumpy Smurf. He should be whinging to Papa Smurf about something, surely. Of course, the chef, my favourite Smurf. Add him right out the front. He's just cooked a nice meal. And over the back here, we'll put Jokey. He's probably going to be playing a joke on somebody. So we'll put him around the back. Look, he's giggling. He's done something naughty, and we'll not know what it is until we open this present box. So there you've got your completed, really cute little Smurf house cake. Now, as an added extra, if you like, I've just got a little bit of green frosting here in a Ziploc bag, and I've just cut the tip off it. This is a really great idea if you've got any little gaps like I do here and you just want to add a bit more detail without necessarily getting in any more Smurfs. So you can just take your frosting and just make like some little bushes. You could stick some little flowers in there, maybe some little red ones with the offcuts from your roof. Just pop some little bushes and some little bits of detailing around the bottom of the house if you've got any bits on the board that you might want to cover up. Certainly this is a great way to do that. So there you have your gorgeous little completed Smurf cake, and once again you can add as much or as little detail as you like to this cake. The basic idea is there. You can decide which Smurfs are your favourite, which ones you want to include and which ones you don't want to pop on there. I hope you've enjoyed watching this tutorial as much as I've enjoyed making it for you today, and as always, thanks very much for watching.